Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast, sponsored by Darla Cashin of RBC Wealth Management. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week we talk with Noah Garon, a University of Minnesota student who just created a line of beautiful and very functional wearable technology for his senior project. We talk about the merging of art and technology, creating his own textiles, and how his Judaism informs his fashion on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Noah Garon, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So Noah, you're a senior at the University of Minnesota, and you have, as part of your senior project, an honors thesis, you have a new, did I get those descriptors right? Is that, okay. You have a new project, out that is on display at the Nash Gallery in the Rarick Center on the West Bank of the U campus. You have a new clothing line, but it's not just a clothing line that you have designed. So why don't you, I guess for starters, tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so my line is a set of 4 evening gowns and 1 jacket that all incorporate electronics into them. So my wearable tech line has electronics that are there for aesthetic purposes, things like lighting up, to safety and medical purposes, like a heart rate monitor, a hypnotherapy technique, or what I've been calling a safety jacket. All that can ease the life of the wearer, as well as just being an elegant, like, evening wear piece.
So how did you get into working in wearable tech or working with wearable tech? Because there's obviously technology. I have it on my wrist. I have it with my phone. Like, we all have, technology. It's very commonplace now. And obviously we wear clothes, but how do you combine those two? Where did that passion come from?
For me, wearable tech was kind of this perfect blend of allowing me to be artistic and creative. In high school, I did some summer programs at an art, at like Brandeis and at BU for art, very into mixed media. But then it also allowed me to be more like math and science and engineering based, because I did robotics in high school. It really allowed me to combine those worlds in a way that gave me the ability to help people and make people's lives easier. And I really discovered what wearable tech was because of this dress that my teacher in high school showed me that was amazing. It was 3D printed. It had spider legs around the neck, and if someone got too close to you, the legs would shoot out. And it was just this really beautiful way to incorporate it. And I thought about, how do we make something like that can be worn every day? So it's not just a runway thing, but it's actually something we can incorporate into our own lives to make it easier for us to live day to day.
Wait, hang on.
Yeah, so around the neck are these like spider
close?
legs. And when you get close to it, the legs expand and push forward. They don't disconnect or anything. They just like, basically, it's perfect for like social distancing. It just expands out and around you.
I was going to say it's the perfect, COVID era piece of evening wear. As if we needed evening wear right now.
I have the jacket, which is what I call the safety jacket, has a distance detector in the back. And so if someone is to get too close to you, a little light and a buzzer shine in your cup. That way, when you're walking home from the event, when you're walking to your car, or if you're just like, walking outside afterwards, you kind of get this set of eyes on the back of your head. And I've been thinking about that idea for a long time. I wrote about it as my college admittance essay. And then I proposed it to the professors, and they're like, perfect. It's a social distance jacket. Make it 6 feet on the range. Perfect. That's what it is now. And I'm like, cool, as long as it's helpful.
That's brilliant. So obviously there's so many applications beyond COVID, and we will at one day get beyond COVID, and it will have real world applications for you down the road. But I'm sort of curious. Do you are you have the design background in creating the line, but what about the technical aspect? Do you create that also, or
So
do you lean
I
on people with
have
that
taken
technical
courses. I
expertise?
have done, quite a bit of work in order to learn a lot of the engineering background that I've needed. Um, it's right now wearable tech. A lot of what's happening is coming from the world of engineering. So focusing on things like smartwatches, which is just a different way to house an electronic uh, component. And so when I was kind of thinking about, what am I going to major in? How am I going to get to where I want to go? A lot of it was, well, there's kind of this gap in the design portion. And when you're talking about something that's on your body at all times, design is what's the most important, because if it's not comfortable, you're not going to wear it. And so you can make an amazing product, but if the person doesn't like wearing it, the product is useless. Um, so for me, what I've done is kind of from I first got interested like doing high school robotics. I then took courses like in the mechanical engineering department, in the product design minor, um, in order to learn some of those skills. I worked in a research lab, and then I have an interest in this, and so I actually spent last summer working as an intern for NASA, where I was working on uh, I was working on a new connection method for an antenna, and I basically had to teach myself how radio frequencies work, how like antennas work, because I had never heard anything about it before. And so before starting the internship, I basically did a crash course trying to figure out what I needed.
That is wild. So it's almost like you're in the ultimate sort of left brain, right brain kind of job where you're doing both. Sort of, you're merging the creative side with this,
Yeah, and that's why I love it
very
so
technical
much, is because
engineering side.
it allows me to problem solve, to think about all of these problems from every perspective I could possibly imagine.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So from a career standpoint, you're a senior, you're going to be graduating in a couple of months. Does the does what you're looking for out in the quote unquote real world, does it exist in this sort of way that it's you can do this sort of high fashion
There
with this tech built
is,
into it?
yeah, I am currently finishing up my senior year. I am applying to jobs. It is during COVID. It is quite a bit, but it's there's kind of this saying in design of like, you don't hire a designer you don't know. So there's everything is about networking, and so I'm trying to do my best in order to find connections and network as best as I can, as being just like a college senior. Um, but a lot of the positions right now are for those engineers, and one of the things that I'm so proud of is coming from a design perspective. And so I'm looking at positions that say that they want an engineer when they actually, what they need is a designer. And so when you're going through like an automated resume process, I'm not necessarily going to click through, because I have a I have a Bachelor of Science in apparel and not in mechanical engineering. So it's, once I can, get that foot in the door, I can explain like, what you need is someone who understands the user. You need someone who uh, can really put the person first and understand the apparel aspects. And so that's where I'm trying to like find my footing.
Yeah, that's got to be hard for you to try to explain to them that what they need is somebody who has the apparel design background, because if it doesn't look good, you're not going to want to buy it. It's got to be, especially in what you're creating, what this line is if it's not fashionable,
exactly. And that is
who's going to wear
definitely
it no
one
matter
of the
how good the
biggest
tech is?
disconnects in the industry right now.
So how big an industry is it? Because like I said, I think of wearable tech as watches. Like what you're when I first saw, and shout out to your cousin who sent me the info about this, and it looks so cool. How I just didn't really think of that as an industry in and of itself of wearable
So
tech. So
it is
how sizable
growing,
is it?
and this is kind of what I'm focusing on my honors thesis as well. It really started in like the 16th and 17th century with like the with like the watch, and then the eyeglasses or wearable tech, like the first brand of wearable tech. The abacus ring is wearable tech of the time. It really became popular in like the medical field with the hearing aid, that's wearable tech, and now smartwatches, because smartwatches really brought in this ability of like everyone can have it. It's very similar to what a phone is like. It pairs well with your phone. And then the other side is medical devices. So for medical devices, anything from rehabilitation to prevention to the life alert, like help I fall and I can't get up. Like that's all wearable tech.
Right.
So it's this ever changing industry, and part of it is it really does branch over a lot: medical, sport, fashion, leisure. Zendaya's dress that lit up at the Met Gala. So there's
Right.
small tidbits in a lot of different places, but it's not as quite like concrete in every place. Yeah.
It's interesting is all of those things you mentioned, it all makes sense logically, like the hearing aid as wearable tech, but I don't I didn't really think about it until you said that as wearable tech.
Yeah,
It to me, it's just sort of you don't really think of sort of those medical type things as in the same way as you would your smartwatch.
right, and that's one of the areas that I really want to focus on. Coming from like this design perspective, there are designers who make hearing aid jewelry. So it's a hearing aid that looks like an earring, and they're beautiful. And it's this notion of just like when you're working with a medical device or trying to aid it with a disability, there's no reason that it can't be beautiful, that it can't make you feel better about yourself. And so that kind of gets into this other world that I was working in on my project of what's called adaptive clothing. So adaptive clothing is specifically clothing that aids people with disabilities, that's designed for disabilities. And so right now it's not as common in the world of fast fashion. It's a little more difficult to just go to the store and buy something like that. You have to like tailor it for yourself, figure out how to adjust it to make it better for yourself. And so I did a lot of research in my previous courses about adaptive clothing, what's out there, and how can I incorporate electronics to make adaptive clothing beautiful for people who just want to go out to an evening event.
Right, and it sort of goes back to what we had said before, is that it's great if it has cutting edge technology, but if it doesn't look good and you don't want to be seen in it, like you have to have both of those aspects, otherwise kind of what's the point?
Right, you don't want anything that ostracizes yourself. If it makes you stand out as being different, you might not want that at an event.
Exactly. So, we've talked about COVID. We've talked about your social distancing design work, if you will. But part of the problem with this is that now people can't just go to the Nash Gallery to see your line. How do people get to go see it now? How do you show it off?
Yeah, so anyone who has access is a student or a faculty member of the University of Minnesota can go at any point. I've been doing Zoom walkthroughs for my family that are out of town. So it's literally just me and my brother walking around, showing it off on my phone. Um, there's also, photos that are going to go up. We actually just did our photo shoot, which is one of the big things. Every other year, this is supposed to be a runway. It's supposed to be like a one night event where all of the dresses are, walking the runway. The underclassmen each get a piece. It's a very huge event. Highly recommend going every other year. So we really had to adapt to figure out what we're going to do that's still meaningful to the students. There's only about 12 of us that are graduating in my class. So what's meaningful to us? So we did a photo shoot instead, and I actually just did that. And the photos that we took came out beautifully. Those will be up, I believe, in Minnesota Fashion Week, hopefully. But those will all be up on the website coming up.
We'll put a link to your Instagram, at least, as long as it's a public account.
Yeah.
We can put a link to your Instagram in the show notes, and this way people can take a look at it, even though they can't walk the gallery or go to a runway show to see it all.
Sweet. Yeah.
So is the as a student in this time, this can't be how you envision the end of college going, right? I mean, you have this great collection, but you can't show it off the same way. You're, I would imagine, pretty isolated, working, out of your apartment, because I mean, most of your classes are virtual, I would assume.
Yeah, it is not what I expected. We actually had two kids who were like, two people in my class that were basically like, this isn't what we wanted. This isn't what we've put in all the effort for. So they took off a year so they can try and catch up again. I didn't do that. I have basically done a lot of it in my apartment. I have my sewing machine. I have my serger. One of the big things is normally we have 4 models that all are different people that we make custom gowns or custom clothing for, and then those models walk the runway. This year, instead, the university hired a modeling agency, so I got one model that I made all 4 looks for. And the way that it worked, which is so interesting, is that cut out the so interesting. One of the ways that it works is apparel is so much more of a computer-based industry than you would ever have imagined. So what we did was they took 3D scans of our models, then they took like measurements of, bust, waist, height, and then sent me the scan. So then I used these online CAD softwares for clothing, one in particular called OptiText, where I can pattern the garments on the computer. I can test them on the computer, fit it virtually on this version of the model that I have. And then our teacher actually, who went above and beyond, she worked with the fabrication labs in Rapson to create foam mannequins of the models that they 3D modeled, or that they 3D scanned. So then I could take my garments that I did on the computer, I could do them on fabric, and then put them to these custom mannequins, and was able to fit that way.
Wow. Okay, so you're not using just like the sort of same old standard dress form that you see, on these designer, on these designer shows, right? You have this customized dress form that should theoretically fit your model almost perfectly when it goes from the form to her body.
Exactly. And like for some of the lines, they were more like clothing that you could buy, like, so it was a more standard fit. But for me, I really wanted to do something custom to her. And so I really took that to the extreme of like, I am using this mannequin, all of my clothing fits this mannequin, which means that it fits her. And I want something that perfectly shapes her body. it was just amazing to be able to.
Did it come out as well as you would have hoped or would have expected given what you were working with?
Yeah, so we took the photo. I never met the model um, until the day of the photo shoot. She was amazing. She perfectly got all of the poses that I wanted. It looked stunning. The photos came out beautifully, and those will be uploaded soon. I could not be happier with how the final photos came out.
But because you didn't meet her until that moment, if something didn't fit quite right or if something needed tweaking in some way, did you have the ability to do that?
Yeah. So it's
again, I've watched a lot of Project Runway in the past, so I understand that things go wrong right before before a shoot sometimes. So
yeah, they're definitely I tend to overpack, so I brought the photo shoot. I brought sewing needles. I brought snaps. I brought safety pins. I brought like hot glue just in case. Like I overpacked a little bit, but it's pretty common industry practice to like take the photos as best as you can. Photoshop them a little bit. You know, use clips if you need to. Use safety pins if you need to. The only part that matters is what's on the camera. So you can kind of work around, what's being
right.
shown.
I think that would have to be unbelievably stressful, given all of the work put in to get to the shoot, but to do it all without actually having met the model first.
Yeah, it was a little petrifying, to be frank. Like one of my gowns has lace side going from the armpit to the hemline, and it fit the mannequin perfectly to the point where it was a little bit of a struggle to take on and off. It looked like the shell of the mannequin, and so I knew, like, especially with COVID, like they got the models were hired and body scanned month like at the beginning of September, like a very long time ago, and so I knew, like, if there's any changes in the way that she looks, in the way that if everyone got that little bit of quarantine weight, I was mortified what's going to happen. And then we showed up. You work around the parts that don't. You put a clip here if you need to, but
right.
it just was perfect. I could not be more thrilled.
That's amazing, and obviously great that it all worked out just right. What I did want to ask you, one of the things you had mentioned earlier was that dress that your teacher showed you in high school with the 3D printing. Do you use any sort of 3D printing or sort of that level of technology, or is it all fabric?
So I've done all of it. So the lace that I used in the dress, in one of the dresses and in the shawl, was actually really meaningful to me personally, because I developed the lace while I studied abroad last year. So I studied abroad in Leeds, England, where I was a textile major. And what was so meaningful to me was that my family has a history in the knitting mills. And so my father worked there, my grandfather, my great-grandfather started a knitting mill up in Duluth. And that was kind of the family business for a really long time. And, it was gone well before I was born. But this, being in England really gave me the ability to touch on some of those family roots of, like, I'm in a knitting mill. I'm learning how to make knit garments, how to make knit fabrics. And then I was able to use those knit fabrics in my senior line, which was just so meaningful to me. I also learned how to I 3D printed. I 3D printed some different parts that aren't really visible, and then I love laser cutting. Huge fan. Been able to do that throughout college. So in one of the dresses, it uses a clutch. There's a clutch, and the clutch lights up, and there's a remote control that's hidden in the dress. And the clutch was actually made on a laser printer, where I laser printed the bird into the bird symbol onto acrylic. I laser printed the front and back of the clutch, and then I used my woodworking skills to kind of build the rest of the clutch. Um, so I kind of touched on as much technology as I could. Also, things just like soldering. I have to solder the electronics together. I have to
Sure.
heat set to make sure that they don't fall apart. So lots of different places that the tech comes in.
I mean, you're a jack of all trades: woodworking, laser cutting, 3D printing, soldering. I mean, it sort of does it all there.
Thank you. I
That's amazing.
do that.
Well, it's great. And I think it's so cool that you had the opportunity. Obviously, it's, in your family's background, the textile working, but that you were able to make your own textiles and incorporate it into the senior project really is very, very neat and very meaningful, that you were able to do it, and could hear the pride in your voice as you talked about it. So that is really such a great opportunity that I got to imagine not everybody's going to have when they get to do a project like this.
Yeah, I have been looking forward to this project for a very long time. Basically since orientation freshman year, like we've known about this project, and I really wanted to be able to do everything that I possibly could for it. And I'm so proud of being able to touch on those family roots, on touching all the electronic parts, on touching on disabilities. The jacket, or the clutch dress, actually came from an idea from my mother, who has chronic fatigue, and so she runs out of energy. Social interactions, long days, they just take all of her energy, and so the clutch really came from, it's a fun party trick. It's a clutch that lights up, different colors, remote control, cool. But then there's this social communication aspect underneath it, where you can set a color. So like, say red. So my mom is at an event. She's running out of energy. She can change the color to red, and then my dad can see that the clutch is now red. He knows that that means she's run out of energy and that it's time to wrap up and to say goodbye. And so they can communicate very silently of like, okay, it's time to go, without having my mom to announce to the entire event that she has a disability, that she is, tired of being there.
No, for sure. It's great. And they can, if they're not together, they're across the room. He can see and know that it's time to pack it up. So that's really, it's such a neat trick, really, that to be able to create this opportunity to do that. And it's love that, that piece, all the inspiration that you've drawn out of your family and your family history to put this together is very, very special, clear to you, clearly. Is there something about this sort of chosen career path in both, design and the wearable tech, that meshes with your Judaism and Jewish values?
They're absolutely intertwined. On my line in particular, there's a very literal, like, visual element. You can see throughout all of my work that I really bring in this bird motif. And that is super important to me because of the midrash out of Kitetse, which was my bar mitzvah portion, but also there's this mitzvot of shooing away the mother bird before taking the eggs. And the midrash is that basically, if everyone is to just do this one simple commandment, then the Mashiach will come. And so that has always come through my work. There's birds everywhere. I've always really loved that. But then more generally, Judaism has always taught me about community, about helping people. To save one life is to save an entire world, to save every generation from that one person. And wearable tech allows me to do the things that I love, problem solving, design, engineering, in a way that I can very concretely help people. And I can make people's lives easier. Maybe one day the electronics are there, so it's like even saving lives, just helping people live day to day, making their life easier. And that really comes from like my Jewish values and my Jewish upbringing of wanting to help people and wanting to do good, and trying to be as good of an influence as I can. The other major way that this really came into play is my line is actually called neshama, Yiddish for like the soul. And when I was designing this, I really wanted to create something that was empowering for the woman who is wearing the dress, for someone who has a disability that's wearing the dress, for the reason that the dress is there at this kind of event. And I really brought that back to this like soul, the spirit of the person. And so neshama became the name of my line. It's become this theme throughout, my work, that I really wanted to incorporate my Yiddish identity into my line. And I thought naming it that would be a perfect way to do that.
Well, Noah, last couple of questions, and we'll let you go. What is your favorite Jewish holiday?
I think my favorite Jewish holiday would probably have to be Passover, because because of, I guess, the family aspect. I really like the big seders and everyone being there together, and like the whole night is just the whole family. I've always really loved that.
And you have a giant
I do. I have a huge family. It's really nice because it's fun to see everybody, as many people as I can. Where our family is just as close, like, to everyone as a family that big could possibly be. So it's amazing because I've got distant cousins, I have close cousins, and I'm just as close to all of them. So it's fun to be able to have everyone there.
Oh, absolutely. And what is your favorite Jewish food?
Gefilte fish. Gefilte fish and Lachschenkugel, hands down.
Okay, gefilte fish, that is not an answer I get very often.
I am not surprised by that. My mom would make gefilte fish with carrots, and it'd be so sweet. My brother and I, we would, it would be like the first course or whatever, like the fish course. We would fill up on the gefilte fish and then barely touch any of the other food. And then I just learned how to make it myself. I'm teaching it to all of my roommates, and it has always been one of my favorite foods of all time.
That one caught me off guard. I'm not going to lie, the gefilte fish.
Keeping you on your toes.
Very much so. Well, Noah, thank you so much for joining us. We will have links in the show notes and in the article to your Instagram page and the Use website, and hopefully people will still be able to see your work on display. But if nothing else, the photos will be there soon, and people can take a look at the collection you've put together. Thank you again for joining us, and good luck with the rest of your senior year.
Thank you so much for having me.
The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.